All right, everybody. See a few people hopping on as we'll give people a couple of seconds, let them get started, and then we'll get going. Thanks everyone for being here. All right, guys. It is 12:01, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Mary Catherine Levy, and I am the Director of Women United and Community Engagement at United Way of Greater Chattanooga. Thank you so much for joining us today for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Continuing the Conversation, hosted by United Way's Emerging Leaders and Women United groups. We're so glad you're here. Before we get started, I do want to address a few things. Number one, this event is being recorded, and we will be sharing it after the event has ended. Number two, many of you know that this is our second attempt at this event. Last week, our event was on the receiving end of a racist intrusion, ultimately forcing us to end the call only 20 minutes into the conversation. The United Way of Greater Chattanooga does not condone this type of behavior in any form. And I want to go ahead and just thank our speakers for agreeing to join us again. We're so grateful for your time and your knowledge surrounding this important topic. Lastly, you may notice that we have changed our Zoom platform and are currently using Zoom webinar instead of Zoom meetings. That means the audience video and audio is not visible to attendees, but we know this needs to be a conversation within our community. So at the request of our speakers, we've left the chat open. Please feel free to submit questions, comments, and thoughts there. We will monitor the chat closely and take appropriate action as necessary. So let us delay no more. We certainly have a lot to cover. I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to Hannah Norman, our Community Engagement Specialist, to introduce our speakers today. Hannah?
Thanks, Mary Catherine, and thank you to all of you who joined us last week and are with us again today. We appreciate you being here and joining us for this very important conversation. Joining us today speaking is Deon Jenkins. She is the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Tennessee Valley Federal Credit Union. Dionne is an avid community volunteer serving on several boards and committees across Chattanooga, and she is currently serving as the chair of our Women United Affinity Group. Next, we have Lakweshia Ewing, who is the CEO of Unlearn Everything and Live LLC. Lakweshia has more than 18 years of experience advocating for and educating others on racial equity. She has been featured in the Huffington and Washington Posts and have received many notable awards, such as the Harvard University Young American Leaders Award. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us and helping us plan this alternative date for this event. We really appreciate you being here today. And Dionne, I'm going to go ahead and let you get us started.
Thanks, Hannah, and thank you to United Way for continuing this conversation. Because Lakweshia, I think you and I were probably the least surprised in what happened last week. And that just shows that there is a need for this dialogue, and we have to continue the conversation, and we can't allow something like that to deter us from speaking the truth and speaking what's right. I did say this in our last call, and I will reiterate that my views and opinions today are my own. They are not those, or may not be those, of TVFCU or United Way. But I'm going to speak the truth. I'm going to be very open and very honest in this dialogue. And I'm also going to kind of change up the format a little bit. So Lakweshia, you'll be ready for this, but I just want you all to know that this isn't going to be an ABC tips and tools on how to continue the conversation. Because to have us on this call would do a disservice if we said, one, do step A, two, do step B. So having us engaged in a conversation to talk about the things that we experience as Black women, to talk about the things that we see happening in and around us, I think would be more beneficial to those participants on the call. And I want to challenge everyone that's listening today that if you came ready to take notes to say, well, step one, I need to do, what I'm going to ask you to do is challenge yourself. As you hear us talk, figure out how you show up in the conversation. Where do you fit? Are you truly an ally and an advocate? or are you a perpetrator? Are you perpetuating the stereotypes that we talk about in today's conversation? What conversations are you having with those around you? Because what you'll watch us do is engage in conversation that we have all the time. And so with that, I just want you all to know that the challenge today is see yourself, do some self-reflection, and understand that these are important conversations that, you know, for Lakweshia and I, it's not about me being the D&I officer for TVFCU or her doing racial equity trainings for different businesses. This is everyday life for us. So Lakweshia, does that work for you, that format?
Thanks for that disclaimer.
Oh, great. Well, I'm going to jump right into the conversation. And last night I'm on Facebook and I'm scrolling and I see a headline for a local news outlet that says that a new Black-owned restaurant had opened in Chattanooga. And so ordinarily, I don't typically scroll through the feed, but I could see the comment that someone made, and it was very sarcastic, and it was a racial comment. And I just thought, you know, let me play along, right? Because, you know, typically those comments, they raise my blood pressure, but I wanted to see where she was going with her comment. And basically what it boiled down to was she was upset that this news outlet used the term Black owned. And so people were going through the dialogue, you know, trying to get her to understand why they used Black owned. And she felt like they should have called it either a small business or a soul food restaurant and not said Black owned. And I thought, well, I personally haven't had an opportunity to get downtown to visit this restaurant.
I have.
But the name of the restaurant tells you exactly what they sell, and it's not soul food. There is nothing on the menu. So to call it a soul food restaurant would do this restaurant a disservice. Right. And so the issue was with the word Black. We're reminded every day that we're Black in America. And what she said was, why can you say Black owned, but we can't say white owned? And so while I don't have a comment for you regarding that scenario, when we left off last week, we were talking about privilege. And that whole discussion that happened reminded me of privilege. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of finish your thoughts on privilege and being Black in America and just kind of sharing kind of where we left off.
Okay. So I'm gonna address those things separately because I think they're two sides of the same coin, but they're very different in terms of how we respond. So I'll start with the local, right? The local story. So even in the name soul food, right? Even in the person suggesting that we call it soul food, you find bias, all right? Because there's an implication that because a restaurant is minority owned, that it must be soul food, right? And so there's some bias there that person who made that statement may or may not have known that they actually exhibited when they made the statement. But we have to go all the way back, right? You know, one of the things that I like to do when I talk about race and racism here in our country, right? Brian Stevenson in Just Mercy, in his book Just Mercy, references being proximate to the problem. That means I'm not going to talk about what's happening in the Congo. I'm not going to talk about what's happening in Ireland. I'm going to talk about the US and Chattanooga specifically. And so when we think about racialized context, it's really important that we realize that there was a place in our society several years ago. There was a place in the society where everything was marked. Mm-hmm. Everything was marked, right? You mark, if you were to go back and look at some of the nostalgic video footage and photography of our racialized past, you're going to see colored only, white only, no Mexicans, no Jews. You know, you're going to see racially restrictive covenants being placed in documents in terms of who can live in neighborhoods, all of these things. And so it's a business term that's called marketness. So markedness, right? Marketness. And it basically is this concept where you mark the other, the thing that is not accepted, the thing that is not blended. Our society was marked. We like through racial, but like every racialized group, there was a place that was marked whites only or colored only. Dr. King comes along, civil rights era comes along, and we start talking about the colorblind society, right? So here's the thing about that. And this is now I have the utmost respect for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the work that happened. But this is what happened post colorblind society. We stopped marking one racialized group. That's it. We took down the whites only signs, but then we had a whole litany list of things that went under Jim Crow that were embedded, subliminal, separate but equal, right?
Right.
But we just took down one sign. So we stopped talking about whiteness. We stopped talking about, but we did not stop talking about race. We didn't stop segregating. And so what we ended up having is this society by which we only marked the marginalized things. Lakweshia, what are you talking about? Well, what does it look like if you were to take, if you're a business, you're in business, Dionne, if a business was to take a list of their vendors, who you do business with, you know, when you do your bid process and all these things, if you went down the list, every year we hear governmental agencies, for-profit, nonprofits talk about how they're improving their diversity, supplier diversity, right? Or how they're improving the diverse businesses that they work with. And they may say something to the tune of, last year, we you know, our WMBE, whether that's racially diverse or gender diverse, you know, that number went from 12% last year to 15% this year. Well, that's great, right? When we see that, people are like, oh my God, that's great, they're improving. But nobody's talking about the fact that that means 85% of your businesses are not racially diverse and probably are male, right? But we don't talk about that. We only talk about the thing that is marginalized. And so what we did was, with this business, we say that now we don't want to call it a Black-owned business. We don't want to call it, there are times when people don't even want to call it a woman-owned business. Let them stand on their own merit. The problem is race has become so ambiguous, but embedded into our culture that if we were to take away all the labels, we'll never know if we were ever improving because they were so baked in that we have to monitor them to see if they're improved. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like it's just so, it's so baked into the structure. So to that end, Black-owned business, there is nothing ashamed or nothing to be ashamed of, you know, a business being labeled Black-owned business. In some places, you know, people may actually think that that's a downfall, that you're not going to get the crossover customers because you've been labeled that way. So there's going to be an argument either way. The reality is that we have to learn how to embrace how that person, those two owners, I know them personally, how they choose to be represented. And that's their choice, right? And so that's, you know, Chattanooga, God bless you. Like that's, you know, you just kind of move on with that. Now, to the point of privilege, that is a tough spot, Dionne, that a lot of people don't want to deal with. I like to talk about privilege through the lens of the word advantage, right? So advantage more so, because when you say privilege, people automatically think tangible monetary wealth. Now, granted, that is a part, but people who grew up poor, who grew up in you know, in rural communities, they will tell you that they don't feel like that they're privileged, right? If you took a person who is self-identified Caucasian or white and they're homeless, and you take a person that's African American or Black, Indigenous people of color, and they're also homeless, both of those homeless people will tell you that they don't feel like they have much privilege.
Right.
But one of those individuals could tell you that they do recognize that they have a slight advantage over their other people that live with them in our homeless community here, even in Chattanooga, in that they can go into a hotel almost inconspicuously, almost clean up, slick their hair back, and partake of the continental breakfast without question, where they've seen, you know, some of their fellow people that live with them on the street, they that are of color, they can't do that, right? So again, this is not universal. This is not to say that every Caucasian or white homeless person has this, but there is an advantage that comes with it. And so when I talk about, you know, this thing of advantage and privilege, I like to give an example. this is really funny. The class of work that I do, right? So I retired. I consult. I'm extremely blessed, and I thank God for that. But here's the thing: when the world was open, y'all, man, I wish I could see faces because I was like, but when the world was open, like pre-COVID, if I structured my week, Dionne, just right, all right, I could go an entire week and never pay for a meal if I had meetings. Because if I have a 7 o'clock meeting, what we eating, Dionne? If somebody called you to a meeting at 7 o'clock, what's the likelihood that you're gonna have what?
Have some breakfast.
You're gonna have some breakfast, at least some Panera bagels or something, right? You're gonna, if we have a midday meeting, we're gonna have some chicken salad chick or Jimmy John's or, you know, Uncle Larry's, whatever, right? If we're meeting in the evening, we're gonna go to Aaliyah, we're gonna go to, you know, St. John's, wherever, we're gonna go to Davis Wayne's, wherever, right?
I've had those weeks.
Okay, I have friends who are teachers who are trying to figure out how they're gonna eat off of $20 a week. So there's an advantage that I have that I actually didn't ask for. I didn't build that into the work class that I work in. I didn't build this culture, but I definitely benefit from it. Right. It was built in an advantage for the persons who can access it. So when we talk about racial advantage, i.e. racial privilege, we're talking about a system by which in this country, if you've never had to stand before the Supreme Court of the United States and ask for a right to do anything, if you've never had to stand to ask for a right to do anything, you have some level of advantage or privilege. Whether you accept it or not, it just is.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that'll transition into my next thought about, I'm not a native Chattanoogan. I moved to Chattanooga in 2012, but I quickly learned that Chattanooga has an issue with classism. And oftentimes what you find is people confuse classism with racism, but the two often do intersect here in Chattanooga. And so I was having lunch with the woman one day, and, you know, we were just talking about some issues with different things happening and just some stuff we had been talking about. And so what she said to me, and she said, Dionne, she said, you know, you talk about women of color not having certain advantages and how, you know, they may attend an event and not feel welcomed at that event. And she said, but I go through that same thing. And I said, okay, well, explain to me what you feel like you go through. And she said, you know, I'm a graduate of Red Bank High School. And when people find out that I didn't go to GPS, you know, they don't want to talk to me like that. And so I told her, I said, that's classism. And she said, well, I mean, but I just feel like, you know, because I didn't grow up on the mountain and didn't go here, you know, like that, I'm not accepted. And I feel like, you know, it's the same thing you talk about with women of color. And I said, it's not. And so I asked her, I said, so let's imagine you're at an event and, you know, someone is shunning you because you're not a GPS grad. Are you still able then to go and find other people in the event that look like you, that know you, that have a, and she goes, oh yeah, a lot of my friends are always there. So I'll just go talk to one of them. I said, all right. I said, imagine you're a Black woman and you're a graduate of Brainerd High School or Tyner High School or Howard High School. And you're having the same conversations with the women that shun you for not being a GPS grad. So they get that same cold shoulder. I said, but unlike you, when you walk away to find your friends, who do they go to? Who do they turn to? So they're new to this event. Like take me, for instance, I'm new to the city. So I don't have anybody that looks like me. I don't have anybody welcoming me with open arms and saying, oh, come sit with us and talk to us. I have to make my way and kind of assert myself onto others to feel like, you know, I fit in or have that sense of belonging. So there's a big difference between classism and racism, even when the two intersect. And so I know that we kind of have this conversation all the time about classism in Chattanooga and the two worlds, the tale of two cities in Chattanooga. And so I just kind of wanted to get your perspective of what you've seen in the workplace or just in your day-to-day comings and goings about the difference in classism and racism and understanding how the two aren't the same.
So another, you're throwing these loaded questions, Dionne.
You know,
Yeah. So that is, I mean, definitely that, I don't think that that's unique to Chattanooga, but it definitely is present, right? I, I'll make this personal disclaimer, right? I'm gonna talk general, and then I'll just say personally. But so personally, I'm a bit of an odd duck. I try to tell, and I think I said this in the last live before we were interrupted. Black people, Black indigenous folks, African American, however you want to label, like, people did not get free and become a monolithic group of folks, right? Dionne and I, both being Black African American women, are vastly different. And if you talk to us beyond this conversation and ask us something that probably has nothing to, right, we meet a little bit, right, on the race topic, but we probably have a myriad of things that if you gave us a topic that we would differ in how we would approach it or what our opinions are. So in that regard, Lakweshia Ewing is a little bit of an odd duck. I am led by my faith, in the sense that I see, I am not going to tell you I don't see color, because the moment somebody tells me they don't see color, I have to walk away, because you are delusional. We are not going to have a productive conversation, right? So I do see humanity, right? But even through that racialized lens, I see the humanity of a person. So I've never met a stranger. That's just me. I tell people my name is Lakweshia. That's what my mama named me. It sounds like loquacious. I've been talking ever since, right? So that's my personal thing. But when you walk into a scenario like you just gave, class plays a huge part in how you show up in different arenas here in Chattanooga, because of how we've structured culture. We've made invisible lines of who has been welcomed. Now, here's the thing. Chattanooga is changing. Chattanooga is trying to do some things, but you cannot forget the past, and the people who haven't forgotten it are now showing up in these once racialized conclaves or racialized social groups. And so you cannot create a scenario by which you are perpetuating tokenism, right? Where we can't afford to be seen as racist, so let's invite Dionne. Or we can't afford to be viewed as, holding a racial prejudice, against people, so we need to put Lakweshia on the board, or we need to put, another person of color on this. Like, it's one thing to be included in with value. It's another thing to be a prop for a checkbox, right? So when we talk about class in Chattanooga, what I'm seeing is there's this blending people. There is a such thing as intersectionality. And so you have class, you have gender, you have, one of the things that I love are people that come here, from the North, Dionne, come from the North. You're like, listen, coming from the South, we got our own language. Like, we're going to cut some endings off some words, and we just need you to catch up with it, right? That's just what we do. So there's all of these intersectionalities, but when you see the intersectionality of race and class and how we structure our systems, be it education, be it housing, now we're looking at not individual racism, we're looking at institutional. We're looking at these institutional biases being structured to where we can look across a community and pinpoint who lives there. And we can go back 10, 20, 30 generations and look at who has perpetually lived there. You can't deny these facts when these things have created patterns. My mom would tell me something one time, you do something one time, it's a mistake. Once you've done it the second time, you now have, this is a behavior. Right. It's a behavior. And so we have to understand that, yes, there is an intersectionality of class. That was a long way around that. There is an intersectionality of class and race, but they aren't synonymous, but they are closely related.
Right. No, absolutely. And I love the way that you kind of bring things to fruition in a way that people can understand and see themselves. And again, that's what we want them to do in this conversation, is get a clear understanding of the differences, but knowing where you fit in this conversation. And so you talked about a lot of things about, I don't see color and tokenism. And, when people say, I don't see color, my automatic response is, then you don't see me.
Correct.
And when you talk about not seeing color in a professional setting, I don't know about you, but I've never been to a meeting where I saw some guy with a gray suit and he's wearing an orange polka dot tie with a red shirt and green socks and yellow shoes, right? So he sees color. So his clothes are matching, so you see color. So what you're saying when you don't see color is you don't see race and you don't want to talk about race. That's what makes you uncomfortable. So when I tell people, when you say, I don't see color and you're talking to a Black woman, what you've said is you just discount who I am and you're trying to devalue who I am as an individual. That's my personal feeling. That's how I see when people say, I don't see color, because you do. Because that outfit you has on tells me that you see color. And I can guarantee you, I don't know about you, but everybody that I know puts white milk in their cereal. I've never seen anybody put chocolate milk in their cereal.
So,
Go ahead.
Just a joke, Strawberry Quick on some big Rice Krispies makes for a great treat, but that's just Lakweshia.
Yeah.
But what I will say is race. So what we have to understand is this thing called race, right? When we are using race and color, right, synonymously. But this thing called race is specious, right? It was constructed. It did not always exist. The reality is that we are. If you were to look at, what is it, the Pantone color spectrum, we're different shades of brown, and there's a whole lot of them, right? Everybody, there's different shades. But this thing that we're talking about is not just pigmentation. It's not just the melanin count. We're talking about this construction of what it means to be this racialized identity. Race was created. We think about going, and I'll geek out here for a second, going all the way back to Linnaeus and those guys, right? Blumenbach and Buffon. They're deciding that we need to label everything. So when you create this structure around of our classifications that we learned about in biology, and people were going around saying, okay, we're going to label this, and this is going to be the mammalia category, and we're going to label this. And so then they took a stab at labeling something that should have never been labeled, and it is completely arbitrary, right? They say, if you live near the Caucasus Mountains, we're going to call you Caucasoid. If you live near Mongolia, we're going to call you Mongoloid. If you live, over here in the Ethiopian Australia area, we're going to call you Australoid. And then we get to this thing called Negroid, which is not even, they defied their own practice. They're no longer associating Negroid with any geographical location. We start talking about Negroid, which comes from Negra, which is dark, Black, right? All of these things. And it doesn't even make sense, but that's okay. We made it up, whoever the said sciences are. And now as a nation, we started to build an entire legal process off of these things that had no basis. As a matter of fact, before he died, Blumenbach came back and said, this was all crap. Like, it was too late though. By that point, he was like, yeah, this is bad science, right? And but by this point, we've established, what we now know as the U.S., but we've established a Jamestown colony. We're writing our laws. We're saying who gets to be a naturalized citizen, and you had to be free, white, and of a good moral character, right? So we're talking about, this is how it was written in our laws. If you go back and look at the Naturalization Act, this is who gets to become a citizen. Well, if you are of those darker hues, you weren't let it, and people forget that, like, this whole thing that the people that we now call white, Dionne, I get excited about this because it's fascinating to me how easily we were duped as a people. But the people who we knew as white at the time aren't even the people that we know, right? The Jews didn't become white at the same time that the Italians became white. The Italians didn't become white at the same time as the Irish became white. And to this day, if you go back to the 2020 census, we have this thing that is so convoluted that whiteness, anybody can be white except for African-American born folks. And like, you can be, listen, y'all, this is how ambiguous this stuff is. You can be a self-identified white / Caucasian person who grew up in South Africa, parents were missionaries or whatever, grew up in South Africa, you come to America, you will be a white American African. It's crazy.
Look at that.
This is what happens when man labels things, right? And so here we are. Even though that was the history, people and their lived experiences have made it a culture. So for you to deny me the culture that I now find defined under Blackness or under African American, or, you know, because Blackness transcends African Americans. People don't understand that. There's 54 subcategories, 54 subcategories of Black. You can be Black Dominican, you can be Black Puerto Rican, you can be Black. If people think about our new vice president, they're like, oh, she's not Black, she's not African American, but she's shown up Black.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so if you, but you don't understand the complexity of race and the diaspora after the transatlantic slave trade and how African people were sprinkled along the coast on the way to this new land that we call America, and created nations and civilizations of brown folks who have Black people that live there. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I get excited, man.
So I'm gonna tell you, if we were in person, I would be passing the plate right now, because you really dropped some knowledge on people. And I hope that those who came ready to take notes are really writing down the game that you're spitting right now, because you're really educating the people. And you've shared so much in that they probably can't keep up with all that you've said. But again, this is better than the 1, 2, 3 having the conversation. This is the conversation. Right. And so I appreciate you for that openness and that level of information and detail that you're providing, that even for me, I'm listening and I'm like, man, okay. And I had to grab my notepad and take notes, because there's still more homework that I need to do. And so what I want people to get, and we've had this conversation because we've been doing a series at TVFCU on how to have uncomfortable conversations. And what I tell them is, these conversations are uncomfortable for everybody, but you have to find a place of comfort where you have to know that we have to have the conversation. So to pretend like it's not happening does nobody any good. Right. So I appreciate just the level of detail and openness that you bring to this conversation. But you know, you talked about tokenism, and you talked about all the different races and nationalities and culture. And it reminds me of growing up in Philadelphia, right? And so, you know, growing up in Philadelphia, I lived in an all-Black neighborhood. I went to an all-Black school where the majority of the teachers and administrators were Black. And the area was segregated. Philly was segregated. So you had the Black side of town. You had the Italians over here. You had the Puerto Ricans over there. You had Chinatown over here. And before anybody starts blowing up the chat box because of my term, Chinatown, when you went to this area, there was a big welcome sign that said, welcome to Chinatown. So that's what it was called. And so you know, my parents, they separated when I was 8, and my mother and I left Philadelphia and went to Virginia. And we moved to a town called Colonial Heights, Virginia. And now you take this 8-year-old who's known Black culture her entire life, you pluck her out of Philadelphia and you drop her into Colonial Heights, Virginia, where the only 3 Black people that she sees are herself, her mother, and her great-grandmother. There were no Black people in the grocery stores. There were no Black people at the doctor's office, nowhere. And then I go to school, and where I am, where it's an all Black school with a Black teacher, now I'm in the classroom and there are 3 of us in the classroom and everyone else is white. And walking down the halls, we just see the 3 of us. So it's like that level of 3. But anyway, I had to learn very quickly how to assimilate. Because in Philadelphia, if somebody says something slick to you, it was on, right? You were gonna fight in the schoolyard after school because you said something smart out your mouth, and now, you know, this is what's happening. Well, imagine coming to Colonial Heights, and to really give you a sense of what Colonial Heights was like. I remember my mother talking to a woman one day, and, you know, it was another Black woman. And she said, well, where are you all from? And where do you all live now? And she said, Colonial Heights. And the lady said, how the heck did y'all end up in Colonial Heights? So that tells you the culture of where we were living. And again, coming from Philadelphia. So I had to learn very quickly that when people say something slick, you can't just fight them. And so, you know, if I decided to fight everybody that said something, I would have been expelled the first week of school. And so very quickly, my mother and I both had to learn how to assimilate into this culture that was completely different from what we both knew. And that has, I mean, to the point where by high school, you know, I knew all the names of the members of Duran Duran, you know, all the lyrics to their songs. You know, I had to show my appreciation for John Cougar Mellencamp and Joan Jett and the Black Hearts and Tony Basil. You know, I was old Mickey, you're so fine, and, you know, all over the high school. And I mean, that's just the reason. So I had this where friends, we were immersed in hip hop culture. You know, I wore my jabots, I had my gazelles, you know, I had my door knocker earrings with my name in them. Like, that's who I was. But then when I was with my friends on the dance team, which I was the only Black girl on the dance team, you know, I had my fluorescent slouch socks and, you know, just so that whole duality. And that's kind of where I am now, even in my professional setting. And so what you find as a Black woman is you have the Black race that questions who you are as a Black woman. And then you have the white race who says, but you're Black. And so you find yourself in this middle. And I often find that people like to challenge that, right? I'm secure in who I am. I'm gonna sing my Duran Duran, but I'm gonna rap to MC Lyte like, you know, I wrote the lyrics, right? That's just that duality. And so you and I have had this conversation in the past about assimilation and how we have to get along to get along. And I would just love to kind of hear your view on, in this professional world and walking that line between two worlds, you know, what are your thoughts on that? Because I love it when you share that with me. And you know, again, you know, I'm always putting you on the spot, like, okay, we talked about this, now I want to hear it here. And it's not to put you on the spot, but I just love the way that you share your perspective. And it's always in a way that people understand.
Yeah. So first, again, I have to say, like, there are things that are, yes, they are culturally relevant, but they're not unique to any racialized group. Like, it's very interesting. You know, I raised my two younger brothers when their mother passed away several years ago, and they, you know, like, their friends are racially diverse, are, you know, socioeconomically diverse. You know, they were from Memphis, so, you know, they came in as kind of transplants into Chattanooga when they were very young. But to watch their friend circles kind of evolve was always interesting for me, because I feel like my parents did a pretty good job. Like, my parents gave me enough rooting. I went to what was called Freedom School in the summer. So I was not left to the devices of public education to teach me about what it meant to be Black in America. I went to Freedom School every summer. And then we had classes on the weekends where I learned about things like CORE and SNCC and, you know, all of the movements that have happened around the Black race specifically, and all of the wonderful inventions, inventors, and just amazing people that look like me. So I had a different seed of education that was injected, and I think that's what's needed. And so because my parents gave me that, I always felt like, oh my God, like I'm gonna fail my boys, because, you know, I actually threw them, because when you get it, when a generation gets an advantage, they tend to pass that advantage on and sometimes forget about the struggle that got them the revelation that they needed to embrace who they are now. And so we sometimes give this advantage to our children and they miss a step, and we have to go back and teach them. So anyway, with that being said, there's such thing, regardless of race, as professional survival, right?
Mhm.
You come into a new city, you come into a new company, you're trying to figure out the culture, right? That's any racialized group. I don't care who you are. You're trying to figure out the culture, especially if you're young and the majority of the people that work in the in that arena are older. You're trying to figure out, how do I find my place? They're talking about stuff that I don't know what they're talking about, and B, care what they're talking about, and and I can't relate, right? And so you do what, if you're going to survive, any young professional, like, this is a young professional tip. If you're going to survive, you're going to have to go and learn about those things. But I can't come to you if you're a 50, 60-year-old, you know, vice chairman, vice president, or whatever of my company, and you're making a joke, and I'm using that that point that you seem to enjoy as a way to bond with you and to connect, I can't come to you right off and like ask you this litany list of questions, right? I'm gonna look real suspect.
Right.
A good salesperson, a good person, and when I say sales, that means you're selling yourself. A good person, you're gonna go research and you're gonna find out some things, and you may actually run up on some good musical artists. You may run up on, some interesting history, but you're gonna make yourself marketable. Now, here's the thing. Here's the issue with this in race. It doesn't always translate. I may know what you know, but my presence in the conversation will change the tide of the conversation. And anyone who tells you that that's not true, it's not being completely honest. I've seen it happen too many times. This is not a 100%, it's gonna happen like this every time, but there's enough frequency that, again, like I said, my mom said, it's a behavior. It's not just an accident. It's something that we see. So when you show up in the professional arena in this melanated skin, you're figuring out how to navigate. Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote in his book, The Souls of Black Folks, he talks about the double consciousness of Black folks. And he wrote this like early 1900s, right? He's talking about there is this balance, and it's a balance. Like, so I would present to people, I say, so this is the way I look at it. Y'all follow me on this analogy, Dionne. If Du Bois said that most Black folks in his book, that we have double consciousness, that's the almost like your formal, informal register that you just described, right? How I am with people of my same racial identity and how I am with people who aren't of my racialized identity. Freud comes along and says that every human being, regardless of racial identity, has an id, an ego, and a superego. All right. Lakweshia is going to throw a third layer on these things and say that when you're making a decision as a person of color in a professional setting, you have a third filter, and that filter is individual, institutional, and communal, like community, like communal, right? So here you have, what's that, 6, 8, right? So you got eight layers, right? So you're sitting at a board table, you're one of 12 board members, only African-American, or maybe only person of color in general. You get asked the question. The thing that has been talked about is really burning you up in the inside. Like it's such a rub because like people are making gross innuendos and racialized stereotypes are flying and they don't even recognize it. And so you have to sit here. The first filter you go to is W.E.B. Du Bois, right? So you go to that double consciousness. I have no idea what's going on with my light, by the way, so I apologize for that. But you go to that double consciousness. Am I going to show up like I would show up with my homegirls on the block, right? Or am I going to show up in my professional registry, all right? That's the first filter. The second filter that Freud gives us, id, ego, superego. Am I going to say what that id? Am I going to say what I really want to say? Am I going to be more mature in what I say? Or am I going to have an inflated version of what I'm going to say, right? So id, ego, superego. And then that third filter is going to be, if I use my id and my homegirl registry and I pair it, I have just forfeited the communal and the institutional filter because I'm speaking as an individual, right? And when I say communal, this is what I mean, y'all. That means somebody else that looks like me may very well never get to sit in that seat again.
Absolutely.
So I have to so you asked me, so Lakweshia, in the board meeting, what do you think about so-and-so? I done ran through 9 different registries in my head. Well, 8 different registries in my head of how I'm going to respond, because the wrong response can create a scenario by which myself or anyone else who looks like me never gets to shoot their shot in a racialized society, right? And so somebody said to me, one of my mentors, who's not African-American, she said to me, Lakweshia, how is that even possible? I said, well, anything that you do repetitively becomes a habit. You can do it unconsciously, right? Like, I don't know how many times I've driven down the ridge not going downtown, like on my way to Memphis, but I get off on Market Street. Why? Because when I come down the ridge, I'm normally getting off on Market Street. So my brain was pre-programmed. Once you've made it to this level, I'm 40 in my 40s. Once you make it to 41 years old, you've been practiced doing this thing. So it doesn't look like I'm doing it to you in the meetings, but I guarantee you I am. because I'm trying to size up where I am and how I show up. Because for me, community is what's most important. That's how Lakweshia's wired. You know, I've self-sacrificed a lot for the collective good, you know, and this is not a martyrdom statement. This is just real talk, you know, because I recognize that I stand on the shoulders of great men and women who came before me. And so I owe it to pay it forward. So I can't blow the shot for everybody by just getting in my feelings, right? Not having that emotional intelligence and really in racialized conversations saying what I need to say. And so that creates stress, that creates that creates a burden that people don't want to have. Folks say often, you know, well, when it comes to race, you know, people are being victims. Well, you know, this is the thing. The thing about being a victim, I don't consider myself a victim, but if in fact I have been victimized, you telling me that I can't talk about it is further victimizing me.
Right. Absolutely.
Let me get free by telling you this is what I really feel.
It's you know, you share that perspective, and in my line of work, you know, doing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the corporate setting, I hear that all the time, like we should be saying this and we should be doing this and that. And what I try to get people to understand is if I were to go in guns a-blazing in that regard, it's going to shut the conversation down. And when I leave, no one's coming behind me. They're not going to create those opportunities. So you bring a really good point. And so I really appreciate you sharing that, because we sit in that meeting and we go, I could say what I really want to say, or I know that there are people behind me and I need to create space for them.
So here's the thing. This is what was interesting. And I personally, again, I told you I'm unapologetic about my faith. I believe that it was divine that we were in a pandemic when the murder of George Floyd happened, because I could imagine actual workplaces around our city and around the nation just imploding because of people's inability to really hold their tongue in that moment, right? And part of this is we want people to feel like they're safe, but there's an exhaustion that comes with consistently having to repress, right? So that's another form of this discussion. When you're talking in your organizations, or even in your personal networks, there are people of color who are exhausted in feeling your questions. Now, people like Lakweshia and, you know, Dionne, I'm gonna speak for you for a sec, but like that this is what we talk about all the time. I feel like we are wired to do so, right? It's a little bit different. Like I train, literally, I'm in the middle of a training series right now, doing this panel. I'm training a group in Cincinnati and they're on lunch. So when I hop off here, I'm going right back to talking to them about race equity. And so getting people to understand that people are tired though. Like you cannot expect the people of color in your organization to be your guide and to teach you things. So some stuff you just have to get on your own. And to your point, the last time when the person asked you, you know, to kind of help them navigate how to talk to Black people and, you know, almost to check them, right? Can you hold me accountable? And the reality is that, you know, no, I didn't get a handbook to learn how to deal with people who aren't the same racial identity, but I do it every day. And so I think we have to understand too, Dionne, that I'm going to give these 5 pillars because I wrote them down. When you think about race and these conversations, there are 5 things that I want people to hold as this is how we discuss this thing. The pillars are: you have to hold compassion, you have to hold curiosity, you have to hold connection, courage, and purpose. All right. And some of these things go hand in hand, but when you think about how you're discussing this, are you coming with a compassionate statement, right?
Right.
You have to hold that compassion. If empathy, contrary to popular belief, Brene Brown says empathy can be taught. If you start off your saying something like, well, at least you are not being empathetic, right? Well, at least you can vote. Well, right. Okay, great. Thanks. I'm not saying that it's not. I voted this morning. If you didn't vote, go vote in our local elections today. And so that's the thing. It's like, if you say at least, you just took away the connection you could have with me through a lens of compassion. Sometimes I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm asking you to see me. See the moment. My experience is not your experience. I just need you to sit with me, right? And then curiosity. Don't be afraid of the person who's different. Don't be afraid of, the person, and I'm not just talking about physically different. I'm just saying their upbringing is extremely different than you. Like, I have friends of different races, different classes, different everything, and it makes my life better.
Oh man.
Like, right? It makes my life better.
Say that again, because I think that's what people miss out, that if you continue to be around people who look like you, then you don't grow. You don't grow personally, professionally. You have to surround yourself with people that are unlike you. And I hope you're going through each of the 5 pillars, because we've been
I'm dropping it in the thing.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So compassion, curiosity, connection is the third one. And so where do you find your connection? Right? Where do you find your connection? Like, because we're of different racial identities, that's a thing. It's there, right? You see it, I see it, whatever. But we have something that's in common, right? Like, I have several friends who self-identify as being, white or Caucasian. And what my friend Tammy, she no longer lives here. She lives in Florida. But I met her when I moved here in 2003. She was a 3rd grade teacher at Hardy Elementary School. She grew up strict Adventist family, went to Southern, grew up in the East. And so here's the thing, y'all. She was one of my best friends here when I moved here. Our upbringing's totally different. We found a bond, and we this sounds superficial, Dionne, but we talked about music. We found a bond because we both were Dave Matthews Band fans. Huge. And we traveled we hit 4 concerts in at least 3 to 4 cities every summer when school was out. That was our thing. And so our friendship built over, like, where's the connection? I tell people, if you're looking to check the box for a Black friend, I have 0 vacancies.
Right.
0 vacancies.
Right.
But if you're looking for genuine friendship, and people can discern authenticity versus obligation. Right? You feel in the workplace that you're obligated to come up and talk to me. I'm not gonna feel that. And so it's not that the person is rejecting you, it's that you didn't bring your authentic self. Right? And that again, that goes both ways. And then next you have courage. Be brave enough to speak what you really feel. My friend that I talk about, when it comes to not everything, but some things, politically or value system, we have totally different values or vantage points on that value. Can we be friends? But we got to be friends enough that I'm going to tell you what I think. You're going to tell me what you think. I'm not going to write you off as being, this huge, like, racialized label. You're not going to do the same for me. We're going to figure out how we live in this thing together. All right. And then be purposeful. Why are you doing this? For me, this work is purposeful. It is what I was built to do. It was what I was built to do, in that everything that I've done at this point in my life has built up to this moment. I come from a family of preachers and teachers. I ran from both and landed in both. And there is nothing more important to me than the unification of humanity and the uplifting of people to what I believe to be God. And that's what I'm about. And so what does that look like? That looks like we can't be separated by man-made constructs. We had some questions. We had a question or something.
So if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. Well, we have about 6 minutes left. Let's see. I just saw a question. Let's see. I really do feel like our community is segregated. How do we overcome that? Not only developing friendships, but also just to find the space to have the conversations. So do you want to take that?
Sure. So the first thing we have to do is we have to recognize, and I think that question, I thought I saw who it came from. But we have to recognize what is the current narrative, right? We can't, Paulo Freire has a book, we get there from here. or something like that. It'll come to me in a second. But his quote, I know the quote says that we can't get to the same there without starting from the same here. Anne Bradshaw, that's who asked that question. And so, Anne, I say to you, we have to figure out what is the narrative? What is it that we're trying to change? What is it that we're trying to address? When we talk about finding the space to have the conversation, what's the conversation? We can't find the space because we really don't know what the conversation is, right? So one of the things that we've been trying to do is create space around history, factual things. It's not facts over feelings all day long, all right? Facts over feelings all day. I don't care how an individual necessarily feels. These are the facts, right? In 1870, Chattanooga had a poll tax, right? In early 1900s, we had bicameral government that basically post-Reconstruction redesigned our city to take the Black people who were in power in a governmental structure after Reconstruction. We had all of these Black freedmen who came and set up in Hill City under what we call Camp Contraband, right? They came in to about like 5,000 plus people. They come in, they build, and they have power and influence. And then our government creates a structure that's bicameral to gerrymander and get these Black folks out of these positions. And we don't see this bicameral government change until 1990 with Dr. Tommy Brown versus the county commissioner, right? So that's a conversation that we need to have. We need to talk about the racially restricted covenants that existed in Signal Mountain and East Ridge and Red Bank, where if you were of this racial identity, you can't live here. And then we got to go and we got to talk about the bank. Until we know who all is a part of the conversation, we don't even know what the conversation is. We have no idea. That's why I urge people, do your own, local and nationally, do your own work, right? Do your own work to try to figure out some of these things. Study things like, when did segregation happen here? Like when you think about Brown versus the Board of Education. Brown versus Board of Education happened in 1953, ratified in 1954. Chattanooga didn't see it really until James Mapp sued and got approved in like 1987. But then when you think about it, our community as a county is so segregated. Technically, you really don't see the merging until the merger of the public and private school. And that was the year I graduated from high school, 1997. So really, when you look at this thing, and if I were to go down, y'all, even further, our schools are still segregated. How do you say that, Lakweshia? How do we have schools that have 98, 99% same race in a school? How is that even possible in 2020, 2021? Right? So there are places where you have to start the conversation, but Anne, you have to eat the elephant slow. You have to figure out, because you can't solve the world's problem. One person can make a difference, but one person won't solve all the world's problems. So what is it that you're focused on, and what tools do you need to hit at that? I may not be able to take that whole elephant down, but if I take my little bow and arrow and I wear out that one leg of that elephant, over time, and I give my children the same instruction, that elephant will fall, but I've only weakened one leg of it, right? But when we think about racism, we see this mammoth thing and nobody wants to talk about it because it's so big. But the reality is that you can dismantle it with the vendor example that I gave you. If you're in a company right now, pull your vendor list and look at who's getting contracts and stop talking about the 12 and 15%, and let's talk about this 85%. And what we can do to truly make this equitable. How do we make it equitable, right? So anyways.
I love it. So I know we have 1 minute left, and we've had some requests for the names of some books. And I know you had some books that you wanted to drop into the chat. So if you would go ahead, or whoever's handling that would drop the names of in the chat. But Lakweshia, I thank you. I thank you for this hour that we had. This is a conversation that could go on for weeks. It could go on for months. And I just appreciate you taking your hour out of your session that you're doing with someone else and giving us your lunch break to continue this conversation. And so, Mary Catherine, I am going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I echo what you just said. I was just thinking, wow, we could probably sit in on this for the next 3 hours and more and just keep going and keep going. So First, I just want to say thank you, Dionne. Thank you, Lakweshia. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, your thoughts, and your experiences. That's such a huge piece of this. And so we're so grateful for your time. Thank you so much. Like we said, to all the attendees, we have recorded this session and we will be sending it out to people. And we can also include those reading recommendations you just dropped in, Lakweshia. We'll add those as well. So thanks everyone for attending. Hope you all have a wonderful Tuesday. And this is not the end of the conversation. So you'll be hearing from us soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.